surrender, surrender, grasp, grasp, draft, draft, trigger, trigger, bond, bond, bondage, bondage, doom, doom, astray, astray, riddle, riddle, weary, weary, weariness, weariness, reverse, reverse, assertion, assertion, assert, assert, stubborn, stubborn,
sin, sin,
kneel, kneel, verse, verse, prose, prose, academy, academy, academic, academic, afflict, afflict, inflict, inflict, upright, upright, uphold, uphold, ponder, ponder, reckless, reckless, enormous, enormous, enormously, enormously, extinguish, extinguish, extinguisher, extinguisher, exquisite, exquisite, internal, internal, external, external,
expose, expose,
exposure, exposure, exposition, exposition,
exploit, exploit,
expedition, expedition, extraordinary, extraordinary, habitat, habitat, habitation, habitation, inhabit, inhabit, inhabitant, inhabitant,
refuse to surrender, refuse to surrender, surrender to something, surrender to something, surrender to the enemy, surrender to the enemy, Surrender a fortress to the enemy. Surrender a fortress to the enemy. Surrender comforts. Surrender comforts. Surrender freedom. Surrender freedom. Surrender oneself to justice. Surrender oneself to justice. Surrender an insurance policy. Surrender an insurance policy. Surrender to grief. Surrender to grief. Unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender. Surrender of a fugitive. Surrender of a fugitive. Surrender value. Surrender value. Surrender charge. Surrender charge. Grasp the nettle. Grasp the nettle. Grasp the meanings. Grasp the meanings. Grasp at the air. Grasp at the air. A good grasp of details. A good grasp of details. A mind of wide grasp. A mind of wide grasp. The final draft. The final draft. A draft constitution. A draft constitution. The first draft. The first draft. A draft of a speech. A draft of a speech. A draft for a machine. A draft for a machine. Present a draft plan. Present a draft plan. Draw a draft. Draw a draft. A beast of draft. A beast of draft. A draft of fish. A draft of fish. Pay by draft. Pay by draft. To draft a constitution. To draft a constitution. To squeeze the trigger. To squeeze the trigger. To pull the trigger. To pull the trigger. Nuclear triggers. Nuclear triggers. To trigger an alarm. To trigger an alarm. Trigger a camera. Trigger a camera. A hair trigger temper. A hair trigger temper. Make a hair trigger delivery. Make a hair trigger delivery. A spiritual bond. A spiritual bond. The bond of affection. The bond of affection. The bond of brotherhood. The bond of brotherhood. A public bond. A public bond. A treasury bond. A treasury bond. Call a bond. Call a bond. The bonds of destiny. The bonds of destiny. Break a bond. Break a bond. Server bond. Server bond. Be bond for a person. Be bond for a person. A double bond. A double bond. A triple bond. A triple bond. Passive bond. Passive bond. Passive debt. Passive debt. Be kept in bondage. Be kept in bondage. The bondage of vice. The bondage of vice. The land of bondage. The land of bondage. Go into bondage. Go into bondage. Sell into bondage. Sell into bondage. Hold in bondage. Hold in bondage. To meet your doom. To meet your doom. No one's doom. No one's doom.
The day of doom. The day of doom. Be doomed to failure. Be doomed to failure. Doom a person to death. Doom a person to death. Go astray. Go astray. Lead astray. Lead astray. Be easily led astray. Be easily led astray. Lead a person astray. Lead a person astray. Get astray from a companion. Get astray from a companion. Read a riddle. Read a riddle. To solve the riddle of the Sphinx. To solve the riddle of the Sphinx. A weary sigh. A weary sigh. A weary traveler. A weary traveler. A weary journey. A weary journey. Weary eyes. Weary eyes. Weary feet. Weary feet. Weary brain. Weary brain. Be wary of reading. Be wary of reading. Grow weary. Grow weary. Have a wary weight. Have a wary weight. Weary a person by flattery. Weary a person by flattery. Weary of a task. Weary of a task. A sensation of weariness. A sensation of weariness. Weariness from labor. Weariness from labor. War weariness. War weariness. Reverse a decision. reverse a decision, reverse a policy, reverse a policy, reverse a process, reverse a process, reverse a procedure, reverse a procedure, reverse positions, reverse positions, reverse the order, reverse the order, in reverse order, in reverse order, in the reverse direction, in the reverse direction, drive a car in reverse, drive a car in reverse, the reverses of fortune, the reverses of fortune, business reverses, business reverses, suffer a reverse, suffer a reverse, sustain a reverse, sustain a reverse, have a reverse, have a reverse, meet a reverse, meet a reverse of plans, a reverse of plans, reverse engineering, reverse engineering, reverse video, reverse video, reversed racism, reversed racism, reverse osmosis, reverse osmosis, reverse shot, reverse shot, reverse gear, reverse gear, reverse charge, reverse charge,
The reverse side of a medal. The reverse side of a medal. The assertion of his authority. The assertion of his authority. A questionable assertion. A questionable assertion. Self-assertion. Self-assertion. Make an assertion. Make an assertion. A mere assertion. A mere assertion. A sweeping assertion. A sweeping assertion. A calm assertion. A calm assertion. An unfounded assertion. An unfounded assertion. Assert boldly. Assert boldly. Assert a right. Assert a right. To assert your independence. To assert your independence. Assert authority. Assert authority. Proudly assert. Proudly assert. Stubborn pride. Stubborn pride. A stubborn child. A stubborn child. Stubborn courage. Stubborn courage. A stubborn resistance. A stubborn resistance. Stubborn stains. Stubborn stains. A stubborn problem. A stubborn problem. A stubborn cough. A stubborn cough. A stubborn pain. A stubborn pain. Plain stubborn. Plain stubborn. Stubborn facts. Stubborn facts. To commit a sin. To commit a sin. A life of sin. A life of sin. Adam sin. Adam sin. To sin against heaven. To sin against heaven. Kneel down. Kneel down. A kneeling figure. A kneeling figure. Kneel in prayer. Kneel in prayer. Kneel at his feet. Kneel at his feet. A hymn with 6 verses. A hymn with 6 verses. Express in verse. Express in verse. A poem of 5 verses. A poem of 5 verses. A long verse. A long verse. English lyrical verse. English lyrical verse. Verse 1's emotions. Verse 1's emotions. Be taught to verse. Be taught to verse. Chapter and verse. Chapter and verse. Scan verse. Scan verse. Limp prose. Limp prose. Prose poem. Prose poem. Prose poetry. Prose poetry. The prose of life. The prose of life. Prose style. Prose style. An economical prose style. An economical prose style.
a police academy, a police academy, the military academy, the military academy, an academy of medicine, an academy of medicine, an academic career, an academic career, high academic standards, high academic standards, academic subjects, academic subjects, academic qualifications, academic qualifications, an academic aptitude test, an academic aptitude test, academic circles, academic circles, an academic degree, an academic degree, an academic curriculum, an academic curriculum, academic interest, academic interest, an academic discussion, an academic discussion, hold an academic lecture, hold an academic lecture, gain academic recognition, gain academic recognition, academic snobism, academic snobism, afflict mankind, afflict mankind, be afflicted with gout, be afflicted with gout, be afflicted with debts, be afflicted with debts, afflict oneself with illness, afflict oneself with illness, inflict injury, inflict injury, inflict a blow a person, inflict a blow a person, inflict pain on a person, inflict pain on a person, inflict punishment, inflict punishment, sit upright, sit upright, an upright posture, an upright posture, an upright bar, an upright bar, an upright chair, an upright chair, an upright man, an upright man, uphold a cause, uphold a cause, uphold the law, uphold the law, support human rights, support human rights, uphold human rights, uphold human rights, to uphold a complaint, to uphold a complaint, ponder a question, ponder a question, ponder upon the future, ponder upon the future, a reckless daredevil, a reckless daredevil, lead a reckless life, lead a reckless life, reckless striving, reckless striving, a reckless expenditure, a reckless expenditure, reckless remarks, reckless remarks,
Enormous interest. Enormous interest. An enormous bull. An enormous bull. A man of enormous strength. A man of enormous strength. Enormous profits. Enormous profits. An enormous difference. An enormous difference. A man of enormous girth. A man of enormous girth. Enormously rich. Enormously rich. Enormously powerful. Enormously powerful. Enormously grateful. Enormously grateful. Enjoy enormously. Enjoy enormously. Enormously little. Enormously little. Extinguish a fire. Extinguish a fire. Extinguish a race. Extinguish a race. Put out a cigarette. Put out a cigarette. Extinguish a cigarette. Extinguish a cigarette. Extinguish a mortgage. Extinguish a mortgage. Fire extinguisher. Fire extinguisher. Foam extinguisher. Foam extinguisher. A chemical extinguisher. A chemical extinguisher. Recharge a fire extinguisher. Recharge a fire extinguisher. Exquisite craftsmanship. Exquisite craftsmanship. Exquisite works of art. Exquisite works of art. Exquisite pain. Exquisite pain. Exquisite pleasure. Exquisite pleasure. An exquisite sense of timing. An exquisite sense of timing. An exquisite flower. An exquisite flower. An exquisite garden. An exquisite garden.
internal rage, internal rage, internal doors, internal doors, internal bleeding, internal bleeding, for internal use, for internal use, internal debts, internal debts, internal navigation, internal navigation, an internal tax, an internal tax, internal trade, internal trade, internal peace, internal peace, internal inquiry, internal inquiry, ensure internal stability, ensure internal stability, internal malaise, internal malaise, external ejaculation, external ejaculation, an external surface, an external surface, a medicine for external use only, a medicine for external use only, external trade, external trade, external affairs, external affairs, an external loan, an external loan, an external debt, an external debt, external politeness, external politeness, judge by externals, judge by externals, expose bare skin, expose bare skin, expose the neck, expose the neck, expose goods for sale, expose goods for sale, expose corruption, expose corruption, expose a crime, expose a crime, be exposed to the rain, be exposed to the rain, exposure to the weather, exposure to the weather, the exposure of a fraud, the exposure of a fraud, double exposure, double exposure, the exposure of children, the exposure of children, die of exposure, die of exposure, a house with an east exposure, a house with an east exposure, a southern exposure, a southern exposure, exposure on TV, exposure on TV, world exposition, world exposition, textual exposition, textual exposition, the exposition of children, the exposition of children, the exposition, the exposition, hold an exposition, hold an exposition, a clear exposition, a clear exposition, a critical exposition, a critical exposition, exploit one's subordinates, exploit one's subordinates, exploit workers, exploit workers,
Exploit a colony. Exploit a colony. Exploit mineral resources. Exploit mineral resources. Exploit a mine. Exploit a mine. Exploit a product. Exploit a product. Achieve a glorious exploit. Achieve a glorious exploit. Perform an exploit. Perform an exploit. Manned expedition. Manned expedition. An Arctic expedition. An Arctic expedition. An Antarctic expedition. An Antarctic expedition. A military expedition. A military expedition. An exploring expedition. An exploring expedition. To lead an expedition. To lead an expedition. Go on an expedition. Go on an expedition. Start on an expedition. Start on an expedition. An extraordinary achievement. An extraordinary achievement. A woman of extraordinary beauty. A woman of extraordinary beauty. An extraordinary appearance. An extraordinary appearance. An extraordinary event. An extraordinary event. An extraordinary ambassador. An extraordinary ambassador. An envoy extraordinary. An envoy extraordinary. An extraordinary professor. An extraordinary professor. An extraordinary general meeting. An extraordinary general meeting. The extraordinary session. The extraordinary session. The destruction of wildlife habitat. The destruction of wildlife habitat. Natural habitat. Natural habitat. A house fit for habitation. A house fit for habitation. Far from human habitation. Far from human habitation. Inhabit a forest. Inhabit a forest. Inhabit the sea. Inhabit the sea. Cemetery inhabitant. Cemetery inhabitant. An original inhabitant. An original inhabitant. An indigenous inhabitant. An indigenous inhabitant. An inhabitant of the town. An inhabitant of the town.